right, looks like we're all getting settled. This is our last and final panel today. We saved the best for last. This is a forum with our candidates for governor. On behalf of the Bar Media Conference, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our candidates. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Ken Foskett. I'm a senior editor at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and I'm on the planning committee for this day. I'm going to introduce our moderators. I did want to pause just a minute to note that our stage today is going to include 2 Democrats and 3 Republicans. Senator Williams is on his way here. He's running a little bit late. But I just point that out because in today's environment of partisanship and so much concern about the impact that is having on our democracy, I think we can all take some comfort that in Georgia we can get together on the same panel, sitting next to one another, different points of view, and have a good and thoughtful discussion about the issues facing our state. So again, candidates, thank you very much for being here. Our moderators today, Greg Bluestein from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, political reporter, covers our governor. Despite his youthful appearance, Greg has covered many campaigns, both local and national, including the most recent presidential election. If you are not in the habit of reading The Jolt every morning when you get up, I strongly encourage you to do that. This is our political blog at the AJC that captures the latest political news, and it's updated throughout the day and includes a lot of very good political news. And if you get up in the morning with The Jolt, then you should definitely spend your lunch hour with Closer Look and Rose Scott, our second moderator today. Rose is the host of that program on WABE. And I want to point out that Closer Look is local programming, and there was some discussion earlier today about how local news has really taken a hit and there just is not as much of it anymore. And Rose's program provides a really great forum for issues in our community and in our region. She has a really diverse mix of people on the show, from the arts, culture, politics, nonprofit community, and I encourage you all to spend some time with Rose, if you don't already, at 1 o'clock, and catch it later when it repeats, I think, in the evening. So anyway, Greg and Rose, thank you for moderating. I'm going to turn over to them. They'll go and introduce our candidates and go over a little bit of the ground rules for today's forum.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, and let me just say that although Greg is the print reporter, I wrote the intro.
There you go.
My work is never done. But to the State Bar of Georgia, thank you for inviting me along with Greg, and also thank you all for being here. As you all know, that it's very important that the media be fair, probably more than ever right now in the climate that we're in. And let me just say, Greg, to you, I really do enjoy the work that you do, and we've worked together on a couple of segments. So, you know, it's my hope that with today's forum, not only will you learn not viewpoints just from the candidates, but also a little bit about what we plan to do in terms of covering the gubernatorial race here in Georgia. And as always, if you have questions or comments, you can email Greg.
gbluestein@ajc.com.
And you can also email me, rose@wabe.org. Now, before we begin, Greg and I are going to sort of lay down the ground rules for today. First, before we get started with the forum and the questioning, each candidate, you all will have 4 minutes to sort of introduce yourselves. Tell us who you are, why you're running to be governor for this great state of Georgia. And if you want to include a statement that is sort of around the judiciary system or anything that deals with the legal and statutes here in Georgia, feel free to do that. And then afterwards, when we get into the forum, we'll ask the candidates a question. If a candidate does refer to another candidate in their answer, that candidate will have a minute to respond. That's just in the order of fairness. And then after Greg and I get through asking our questions, you all will have an opportunity to ask questions. And we encourage you to take notes, to listen, because if you have a question that you didn't hear us ask, because we don't know all the answers, Greg does most of the time, but make sure that you take the opportunity after we're done to ask these candidates their question. Anything, Greg?
Oh, and then we encourage the candidates to make sure you speak into the mics because this is all being live streamed and broadcasted.
So we will start at this end, and we'll have Ms. Abrams begin with her opening statement.
Hello. Sorry, it's a little bar humor. Hi. I actually can't tell if it's working. Can you all hear me?
Right, guys? Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. So my name is Stacey Abrams. There's going to be a little of repetition. Stacey 1, Stacey 2. But I'm excited to be running for governor of Georgia. I have lived in Georgia for 29 years, but I was raised in Mississippi. And I bring to this race an understanding not only of the state of Georgia and the city of Atlanta, but a grounding in Southern values. But one of the reasons I'm running is because as much as I've heard about the conversation of the two Georgias, I think there are actually three Georgias. There's the Georgia that was, there's the Georgia that is, but I'm running to lead the Georgia that will be. This is a Georgia that is diverse in its economy, diverse in its demography, diverse in its geography. And it requires a leader who respects and appreciates all parts of that. I have a bold new vision for how we lead the state, one where we educate bold and ambitious children from cradle to career, where we build a thriving and diverse economy across the state of Georgia in all 159 counties. I've been to 155, I've got 4 to go. And I've been to all of those counties because I don't think you can lead a state you don't understand. But you also have to have a leader who is a proven leader, who not only brings ideas to the table, but has the experience to execute them. I've been the leader in the legislature as the first woman to lead either party in the Georgia General Assembly, the first African American to lead in the House as minority leader. I've been the leader in my business. I've started companies that have created and retained jobs across the state of Georgia. And I led a nonprofit organization that registered more than 200,000 people of color in the state of Georgia between 2014 and 2016. But I also have led in the legislature by moving legislation forward, sometimes in opposition, but often in cooperation, because I also understand that the state of Georgia has a diversity of opinion, and that as long as we are willing to stand in our principles and in our values, we can work together to get good things done. One of my proudest moments was being able to work with the Tea Party to get an environmental bill through and to block other things from happening. And when you can get a liberal Atlantan and someone from the Tea Party on the same page, either magic is happening or good is happening. And so I stand here or sit here today because I know that the state of Georgia needs leadership, needs someone who's a proven leader, has bold and ambitious ideas, and has a new way to get things done. I'm excited about this campaign. I'm excited about the opportunity to debate ideas, but I'm also proud of the work I've done for the Judiciary. For the 11 years I served in the legislature, I served on the House Non-Civil Judiciary Committee. I worked on issues of criminal justice reform, being one of the co-sponsors of that legislation. But I've also done the work of defending the First Amendment, fighting against legislation, voting against legislation, sometimes taking tough votes to make certain that we respected the full breadth of the First Amendment. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And so I'm excited to have this conversation today, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Ms. Evans.
Thank you so much to the bar for inviting us all here today, and thank you all for being here, even though I'm guessing most of you are here because you're behind on getting your CLE credits, and this is one of the last few. We won't take offense that you're not really here to see us. It's okay. I'm behind on mine too, so I'll be where you are next month, most likely. But I'm up here on this stage today as a product of three things: hard work, determination, and also good government policy through the Hope Scholarship Program here in Georgia. I was born up in Ringgold, Georgia, up in the northwest corner of our state, small town up on the Tennessee line. My mom was only 17 years old when she had me. She was a teenage mom who never graduated from high school. My birth father, he didn't stick around, and we struggled. I remember living in at least 16 different homes by the time I was 18 years old. I remember more times than I care to remember coming home and finding that our lights were not working because we hadn't paid the bill, and watching my mom struggle. And I remember one time very vividly having to call the police when one of my stepfathers was beating up my mom. I called the police for help, but the police told me that they knew my stepfather and they didn't think he'd hurt a fly. So they didn't come and help us that day. And I will never, ever forget that feeling I had of hopelessness and powerlessness and disgust, that the people that were supposed to be there to protect us were refusing to do that for my family. And it's then that I realized more than any other time just how much it matters who's in power and what people can do with power. Now, I had a high school teacher, Miss Henderson, who taught me the good that people can do with power. She invited Governor Miller to come to my high school and tell us about this brand new program in Georgia called HOPE. And he explained HOPE. If you kept up a B average, you could go to any college, public college or university in Georgia tuition free. So that was the answer. I made a B. I went to college. I went to the University of Georgia, the first in my family ever to go. And that changed everything for me. HOPE saved me and brought me a life that I never could have imagined. And now I'm running for governor to bring that same hope and opportunity to all Georgia families. Because I think that's the magic of Georgia. We're a place where progressive policies have won out, where we've put people first. I'm a living, breathing example of the good that this state can do when it focuses on people and puts people over partisan politics. Now, that's not the only example of when this state has gotten it right. When the governor and the legislature put aside partisanship and worked on criminal justice reform, that was another example of putting people first. Now, we've still got some work to do. We need to make sure that those accountability courts are all over the state. We need to make sure that we end private probation. We need to make sure that we end the cash bail bond system for low-level offenses. And we need to make sure that we are offering educational and job training opportunities to those that are in jail so that when they get out, they have a job to go to and they don't fall prey to recidivism. But we can't put people first if we are focused on scoring political points. I think it's terrible that some of the top Republicans running in this race are embracing the far side of their primary and clinging to the religious liberty legislation that is really a license to discriminate, and fighting against loving same-sex couples who just want to adopt children. That's not just hateful, but it's an economic disaster waiting to happen. Jobs gone. Our chances for Amazon gone. Tourism gone. We can do better than that, and I know that the people of Georgia want us to do better than that. I've been on the campaign trail for 9 months now, and I know that people want solutions. They don't want divisiveness. And divisiveness is a terrible long-term strategy, and we're seeing the effects right now. It's dangerous, and we're seeing the effects every day play out. We cannot retreat to the far sides of our party and just talk to people that already agree with us. We have to talk to all Georgians, and we have to embrace policies that help all of us. That's the Georgia that I know. That's the Georgia that leads and puts people first. And that's the kind of governor that I will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Evans.
Good afternoon. I'm Hunter Hill. It's great to be with y'all. I spent 5 years on the Judiciary Committee in the State Senate, so while I'm not an attorney, I feel like because of the pain that I went through, I should have an honorary law degree. But no, it's great to be with y'all. I'm Hunter Hill. I'm a lifelong Georgian, grew up here my whole life. I got a chance to go to West Point to play football and took that chance. And then I chose to become an infantry officer, which brought me down to beautiful Fort Benning, Georgia, where I learned to jump out of airplanes and became an Army Ranger, and then led 5 different teams on 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've been in the real estate business. I've been running a small business for the last couple years, and I'm married with 2 children, and I've been in the state Senate for 5 years. And I can tell each and every one of you that there's so much more we can be doing to help Georgia reach its full potential. But it's not going to happen unless we elect a true conservative leader to be our next governor. And I can tell you why. I mean, the vast majority of Georgians believe in the principles of less government, less taxes, and more freedom. And those kinds of things are not going to be implemented if we elect a career politician. And so I want to tell you a little bit about my vision. You know, as I've observed it and experienced it in my life, the size and scope of government has so grown that it's usurped the role of the church and the family. Our communities are suffering as a result of the size and scope of government. So what I believe we need to do for Georgia is to have a more limited and focused government that delivers results for taxpayers. What I mean by that specifically is we've become a jack of all trades in the way that we spend your hard-earned tax dollars, and we're not delivering results in the categories, and it results in, candidly, us underfunding the core competencies of government, one in which y'all's expertise and livelihood is a part of, and that's public safety and criminal justice. But so what I want to do is focus our funding in 3 areas: public safety, transportation, and education, to begin delivering results for taxpayers. Number 2, I want to eliminate the income tax in Georgia. From an economic competitiveness standpoint, we are falling behind other southeastern states by having one of the highest income tax rates in the southeast. So this will be a great boon for our economy. It'll create economic opportunity for all Georgians. And then thirdly, K-12 education is that first rung on the ladder of opportunity, and we have to elevate the game for our families. And I want to do that by empowering families to have more choices and options. It's the economic principle, free market principle of competition, that we would allow families to be in charge of the resources we're already spending on education and let them have more choices and options. So that's my vision for Georgia. Specifically, what Governor Deal has done that I was proud to partner with him on is criminal justice reform. By delineating the difference or highlighting the difference between those folks that we're mad at versus those folks we're scared of, and making sure that the people that we're scared of are locked up and punished, and the people that we're just mad at, so to speak, that we help them get on with their life and become productive taxpayers and elevate their own circumstances and not lock them up for longer than they should be. So these are the things, the kind of reforms that are congruent with my vision. I supported them in the Senate. I'm looking forward to your questions, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Mr. Kemp?
Well, thank you so much for having me this afternoon. My name's Brian Kemp. Serving in public office was never some part of some grand plan. My wife often says that running for governor was certainly not in the marriage vows. But as I built my business over the years, I really became frustrated with government regulations, taxes, fees, and quite honestly just got fed up and decided to do something about it. I ran for the state Senate in a district that was centered around Athens, Georgia, against an incumbent, and pulled off an upset. And for 2 terms, I fought for Georgia families, Georgia businesses, and Georgia's future. In the Senate, we repealed ridiculous regulations, we cut job-killing taxes, defended our constitutional rights, and advanced our Georgia values. Years later, I've had the opportunity to serve as Georgia's 27th Secretary of State. I've used my experience in the private sector to modernize the Secretary of State's office while cutting the budget 25% at one point and providing better services and better outcomes through technology upgrades. It has never been easier to file or maintain your current company's registration in the Peach State. In fact, last year we had a record-breaking over 653,646 business entities file annual registrations with the Secretary of State's office. This figure shattered the 2016 record, and we're off to a record pace this year. We've had similar success with our online voter registration system, record turnouts, record number of registrations, as well as record minority participation over the years. During my time as Secretary of State, I have been honored to travel to all 159 counties, and I've worked with many to bring lawbreakers to justice. A lot of people don't realize, but we have a team of 38 investigators in our division of the Secretary of State's office that works with the Attorney General's office, lawyers around the state, to prosecute those who are trying to undermine our elections, take advantage of the elderly, or those who are trying to line their pocket. We've partnered with the GBI, the Gwinnett County DA, and the Fulton County DA to catch and prosecute a massage therapist who was videotaping and photographing clients without their permission. We've also stopped Ponzi schemes, charity scams, illegal loans, and securities fraud in all 4 corners of our state. I certainly have a track record of fighting and winning for hardworking Georgians. When I ran for the Senate, and also when I campaigned to serve as Secretary of State, I told voters what I was going to do, and then I did it. That certainly will hold true as your next governor. I have a conservative 4-point plan that will ensure a bright and promising future for all hardworking Georgians throughout our state. It's a plan that puts Georgians first. Number one, our state has been ranked number one for business 5 years in a row. Certainly a designation that we can all be proud of. But as your governor, I have another goal in mind, and that is to make Georgia number one state for small business. And after 30 years in the private sector, I know that the only way to make Georgia number one for small business is by making state government more responsive, efficient, and accountable. We must take a chainsaw to government regulations that kill jobs, destroy mandates that penalize progress, stand firm against any healthcare overhaul plans that punishes growth. Secondly, as your governor, I'll fight to implement a spending cap that adjusts with population and inflation. This cap is simple. We cut waste, we agree on our priorities like education and public safety, we then pass a conservative budget that reflects our values, then we have tax reform for all working Georgians. Number three, to realize our full potential, we have to treat all communities, including rural Georgia, the same. Better opportunities in education, economic development, infrastructure, health care, no matter where you live, and high-speed internet, no matter your zip code. Finally, we have to put hard-working Georgians first. And as governor, I will do that. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you. And a reminder for our candidates, you will have 1 minute to answer the question. And if you go over time, we might allow for 10 seconds, but if you go further than that, you might get a thank you. All right. First question, and we'll start on this end. And let's begin with action today. The Georgia Senate approved a bill that allows adoption agencies to use what they cite as their religious beliefs as justification to deny gay couples a service. As the next governor of Georgia, how do you see this type of legislation? Would you support this type of legislation if you were governor of the state of Georgia? Ms. Abrams?
Absolutely not. What brought me to Georgia was that my parents decided at the age of 40 that they weren't poor enough. They decided to become United Methodist ministers. And so we moved from Mississippi to Atlanta so they could attend Emory University. When my parents picked the church we would attend, they didn't pick one of the historical African-American churches in Atlanta. They found a church on Peachtree Street at Peachtree and 5th called St. Mark United Methodist Church. They picked that church because of its commitment to social justice, because they raised us to believe that you always defend the rights of others. And the first protest I participated in at that church was a counter-protest to an anti-gay march that was going down the middle of Peachtree Street. My mom and my dad and my 5 brothers and sisters, the members of that church and an El Salvadoran refugee family, stood on the steps of the church holding up signs saying, "God loves gays." And we did that because my parents wanted us to understand that even if that is not your experience, your responsibility is to defend the rights of others, no matter what the cost. And so as governor, I would absolutely oppose and veto any legislation, but more than that, I would speak out against it from its inception. As minority leader, I fought every single year against religious freedom legislation. I refused to sign it. I fought against it. I led my caucus against it. And as the next governor of Georgia, I will make certain none of it ever passes.
Thank you. Ms. Evans?
I absolutely would not support such a bill. It's hateful, it's discriminatory, and it sends exactly the wrong message to the kind of people that we are hoping will move here, not only to live, work, and play, but also people that will come here and bring their businesses so that our Georgia citizens will have good paying jobs. It's exactly the wrong direction. I think it's despicable that there are folks running in this campaign for governor that have expressed support for it. It's wrong. What we need in Georgia is comprehensive civil rights protections. I was proud in my last session in the state legislature to introduce comprehensive civil rights legislation that would have protected against discrimination in our state in public accommodations and in employment settings. That's the direction that we need to go in to send the right message to the rest of the country. We've seen these so-called religious liberty legislation bills play out in other states to great harm to those states. Indiana, North Carolina. We don't have to guess at what will happen if we keep going down this road. We will lose, and it's exactly the wrong direction, and I do not support it.
Thank you.
I think we all have to back up a little bit. I think the First Amendment is right there on the screen for everybody to see, and it talks about Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. But we have to back up and say, well, why in 1993 did we pass a federal RFRA? And then why did in 1998 we have to have a RFRA to protect states? And the reason is simple, and y'all know this because y'all are in this profession, is that when there's case law, when a judge passes down a ruling, it can have the net effect of of watering down the intent of the statutes. And so you put a statute on the books to make clear the intent of the legislature of that state, that all constitutional protections are protected at the strict scrutiny standard, except for now religious liberty. So the RFRA merely restores that. I think we have to recognize that because it's a foundational principle in our country, it has to be stood for. Look, I had a mandate to defend our Constitution in other countries where there was war going on. And, so I've been to countries that don't respect religious liberty. And if you go there, I suggest you do what I did and take a gun, because a nation that won't respect your religious liberties will not respect any of your liberties. So I think it's very important to stand up, and when we're watching the downgrading of constitutional liberties being downgraded over time, that we have to stand up. Now, specifically on the issue of protecting adoption agencies, I would be against a bill that said you could not allow same-sex couples to adopt. That's not what this is about. This is about allowing the freedom of an agency, just one of them, to be able to choose based on their religious preference. This is about liberty. It's about the free market of ideas, and I would support the bill that just went through the Senate.
Thank you. Mr. Kemp?
Okay, well, thank you. Yes, I would support the bill as well. But really, quite honestly, we need to do more than that. Before the session, I actually called on the legislature to pass Representative Burt Reeves' bill, which has happened now. I put out a whole adoption reform plan that had, was urging the legislature to pass a clean adoption bill, which they did, and deal with other issues separately. But regardless of that, we still need to do more, and I'm the candidate in the race that actually has a plan that would increase the tax credits to make adoption more affordable. It would also pre-approve families to speed up the process. It would also expand the adoptions that applies to, from state-based adoptions to all adoptions. It would also, as the lawyers in the room know, the word escrow account. It would create an escrow account where these families could safely put their money to help protect them against unscrupulous agencies or people that are out there that try to defund some really loving parents that are trying to adopt. And those things would be available to anyone who was trying to adopt. And that's what I'll be implementing as your governor.
Thank you, Mr. Kemp.
Here's another timely question. Just a few hours ago, Florida Republican Governor Rick Scott backed raising the minimum age to buy any firearm from 18 to 21 in Florida. Would you support a similar move in Georgia? And what would be the first step you'd do if elected governor to prevent lethal weapons from getting into the hands of mentally ill people? Representative Evans, let's start with you.
Thank you. I would support similar legislation here in Georgia. What happened last week and what we've been seeing happen over the last couple of years in schools and churches across this country is terrifying. As a mother of a soon-to-be 6-year-old, I give her a hug and I kiss her goodbye every day. And watching the images of those kids filing out of that school on Valentine's Day with heart balloons, running for their lives, is tragic. And we should do everything in our power to make sure that it doesn't happen here in our state. One of the first actions I would take in Georgia to implement reasonable, common sense gun legislation is to direct our Department of Public Health to study how best can we fight against gun violence and the tragedies that result therefrom. I support universal background checks, but I want to know what specifically is supported by evidence to stop this violence. The CDC has been bullied into stopping this kind of research, but I want to do what I can within the state of Georgia to make sure that we are working on evidence-based solutions to stop this tragedy.
I think what just happened in Florida is an unbelievable tragedy, and we need to back up and again look at why, while measuring what is the importance of our Second Amendment. Why is it there? It's a foundational constitutional principle because our founders believed in the individual. So when you take away the individual's ability to protect themselves and their families, what you're going to naturally do is elevate two groups: the government, because we're going to say they're going to protect you, and then we're going to elevate the criminal who has no interest in doing anything as it relates to following laws. So when you undermine the Second Amendment, you're strengthening those two groups, the government and the criminal. And so that's why I want to stand in the gap in defense of the Second Amendment. Now, as it relates to the specific question, of course, if we're going to have gun laws, we've got to have parity. So if it's 21 on a handgun, it makes sense to make it 21 on the automatic weapons or the semi-automatic weapons. But the reality is we can't let this dialogue, this tragedy, undermine the future bedrock or the future, because we're going to undermine the bedrock of the Second Amendment. And the last thing I will say on this is that we cannot have gun-free zones. This is where these things are happening. These perpetrators are cowardly, and they are going to go to the softest targets available. So we need to make sure we protect our children and allow whatever means necessary to make sure that our children are protected.
Well, I would just say, first off, I've been a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I will continue to be. I've been a responsible hunter, shooter, and someone that carries, and that's certainly a tragic thing that happened. But a lot of times in politics, people start reacting before they actually know what actually happened. And we continue to see more details coming out about, armed people at the school that didn't go in and help. How did that individual get in the school with an assault rifle? I know I've been in many schools that you have to check in the front desk, and if you walked in with a bag or certainly, hiding an assault rifle, that would certainly raise suspicions. So, I hate to overreact to a situation even as tragic as this is, as a father of 3 teenage daughters. But I also know there's a lot of responsible 18-year-olds, many serve in our country, that are dealing with a lot more powerful weapons than what was used in that tragic killing. And quite honestly, there could have been as much damage, certainly with other types of weapons, whether it was a bomb, a shotgun, multiple handguns. So I think we need to tackle the problem in a lot of ways. I mean, when I chaired the Public Safety Committee in the Senate, I worked on courthouse security after the Jamie Hood shooting that just happened literally right down the street, and came up with some reasonable measures to protect our courthouses. I think it's time that we have that discussion, and I believe in local control, and I believe our local schools will have that discussion, and if they have needs that the state needs to be involved in, I'm sure that they will deal with that. But we've also got to deal with mental health. I talk to many sheriffs, many people in law enforcement that every day have concerns about mental health. So I think that's something that we need to address as well as a state government and really as a country.
Thank you. And again, candidates, just a reminder, you have about a minute, maybe a minute 10. We're being generous to answer your questions. Thank you.
Ms. Abrams?
Yeah.
So I think there are 3 things we have to understand. While research is important, we know what causes violence, what causes gun violence. And chief among them is access to weapons. We know that we should ban assault weapons because when we banned those assault weapons, we did not face the recurrence so frequently of these mass shootings. We know that we need to have extreme risk protective orders to allow people to ensure that if they have a family member who is a danger to either themselves or to others, to be restricted from access to weapons. We know that universal background checks will help protect people, because if you do not have universal background checks, people will fall through the cracks and will be able to access weapons. But we also know that past behavior is a very strong predictor of future action. And I'm the only candidate in this race who has never received a B or better from the NRA. I've actually always failed the NRA's test because I've consistently voted against any bills that would weaken gun safety. SB 350 is a bill that moved guns back onto the streets. That is deeply problematic, and it should not have happened. And so I stand here, or sit here again, as someone who will tell you that if we want to protect our families, we have to think about mental health, but mental health is not the only issue. It's an issue of domestic violence, and with domestic violence, predators having access to weapons. It's a conversation about felons who come from other states who slip through our background check system. And it's about making certain that the weapons that are being used to harm our families and make our communities vulnerable are no longer eligible for purchase.
Thank you. Time now for our next question. As you all know, here in Atlanta, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms did sign an ordinance that would pretty much eliminate no cash bail bonds for low-level offenses. Now, it's a movement that is taking place across the nation. 2 states, New Mexico and New Jersey, have pretty much eliminated it across the state. Is that something that works best here for Georgia, or should it be left up to local governments? And Mr. Hill, we'll start with you.
I think in that scenario, we'd leave it up to local governments. I'm a big proponent of local control on those specific issues. But, you know, public safety is very important. And, you know, there's 2 things that are at issue on this conversation. Number 1 is protecting the public. And then number 2, it's of course not allowing a low-level offense to put somebody who doesn't have a lot of means into debt into significant ways. So I think striking that balance is very important, and if that's the decision that makes the most sense for the city of Atlanta, then you know, I'd be willing to look at that.
Well, I would just say I have concerns about that. As I've traveled the state and talked not only to law enforcement but Georgia families, I think people are getting fed up of some of the revolving door on certain criminals that continue to wreak havoc in our neighborhoods. I certainly think we need to do a whole lot more at deporting criminal illegal aliens that are here in our state, that are shooting our children, shooting our families, breaking into our homes, selling drugs, creating, you know, bigger and bigger gangs that our local law enforcement people are not only having to deal with, but try to keep safe from. So I will be one as governor that will be tough on crime, making sure that we're protecting our families, working with the local prosecutors and local law enforcement to do that, and also working with the feds when it comes to deporting criminal illegal aliens, because it's costing our state and our country a tremendous amount of money.
Thank you.
I've issued a plan on criminal justice reform that seeks to absolutely end cash bail. I do not believe it's an issue of local control, because we're all Americans, and anyone who is in our jail should be treated the same no matter which jail they're in. And unfortunately, in the state of Georgia, more than half of the people sitting in jail awaiting decisions have not been convicted of the crime for which they're being held. And the distinction is often whether or not they can afford to pay to get out. We cannot privatize justice, and you certainly can't make a profit off of it. And so I do absolutely support the end of cash bail. But I also believe that we have to think more broadly about criminal justice reform. Part of our challenge is that we have criminalized being poor in the state of Georgia. We've seen what happened in Ferguson, and we've seen it happen in our own state, where people are charged with traffic offenses and low-level crimes and find themselves in a predatory situation where they're constantly paying to be free. We should make certain that civil penalties are imposed when that makes the most sense, and that we restrict criminal penalties and bail penalties for the times when we are actually afraid of someone, not simply because they can't afford the justice they seek.
Thank you.
I think that what Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms implemented in Atlanta to get rid of cash bail bond system for low-level offenses was a great move for the city of Atlanta, and I want to bring that to the entire state. I absolutely think that it is the right move. The idea of folks sitting in jail simply because they can't afford to pay a bail bond breaks my heart, because it's taking people away from their families, and that hurts families, and it's taking people out of their jobs, which makes them fall further and further behind. So it makes a minor offense turn into a huge problem that can lead to so many harsh consequences that I don't think any of us would say is a good idea. So we have to make sure that we end that system. And in general, we need to get the profit out of prison. For-profit probation is a problem. And when I'm governor, that will end. But across the board, we've got to make sure that we are growing on the success that we've had in criminal justice reform. As I said earlier, making sure that we make education and job training available for those that are behind bars so that they can get a job and be productive members of society when they get out. I think that we need to continue to move further in expanding the treatment courts and treat those who are arrested for drug-related crimes because of an addiction, treat them as victims of an addiction and not as criminals.
In the State of the Judiciary yesterday, Chief Justice Hines said more than half of all inmates admitted to prisons in 2016 had a diagnosed mental health issue. And he said prisons cannot be, quote, our frontline and most populous mental health facilities. Tell us what you would do to improve mental health treatment in Georgia. Secretary Kemp first.
Well, I think there's obviously a lot that needs to be done. I know certainly Governor Deal has had to deal with that, with certain legal issues that have gone on. But I think also, federal mandates that the states have gotten over the years to try to get everyone out of certain institutions has created really some interesting scenarios out there. And then when we continue to have catch and release, if you will, of habitual violators that are not being treated for their mental illness, not having enough facilities to do that, I think it begs the question that, what we've got to do more in our state. And I'd certainly be a governor that would be willing to work with all areas of our state, because I'm sure it differs depending where you are in the state, the resources that you have. Certainly, being from Athens, very interesting scenario. We always have very low unemployment in Athens, but we also have a high poverty rate. So that's a good thing on one hand, but it creates a lot of issues on the other. Whereas I know the city of Atlanta is dealing with, many issues, but then our rural communities are as well. And probably a lot of the rural communities don't know some of the problems that they have. So it is not an easy situation to tackle, but it is something that we need to certainly work on.
My brother Walter currently serves time in a Mississippi State prison. Walter is a heroin addict. He started self-medicating when he was around 16 or 17 because my brother is bipolar. And like so many folks who grow up in poverty, like my family did, we didn't have access to health care. And so when he started presenting when he was a teenager, it was mistaken as him being belligerent and rambunctious. We didn't know that he had a mental health disorder. And so over time, he self-medicated, beginning with alcohol, and he graduated to harder and harder drugs. And for the rest of his life, he will be bipolar and he will be a heroin addict. And now he's also incarcerated for the second time. What we have to do are three things. First and foremost, we have to provide access to health care, mental health care treatment early on, which is why I'm a strong proponent for the expansion of Medicaid. Georgia does not have adequate facilities, adequate number of servicers, and the opportunity to provide not only mental health treatment, but substance abuse treatment, because we've refused to accept the $30 billion to which we are entitled over the next 7 years for mental health treatment. Number two, by refusing those dollars, you cannot get the treatment you need in our jails, because our jails are being used as holding pens and not to provide services. And so we have to accept those dollars for that purpose. And once people are released, because we have not accepted Medicaid, when you get out of jail, you cannot continue your health insurance because you're ineligible for Medicaid. And for most of the folks who need the help, they cannot maintain a job, they cannot find a place to live, they cannot stabilize, and so they relapse and reoffend. That is why I've put forward a very comprehensive plan for criminal justice reform that looks specifically at the issues of mental health disorders and substance abuse, because these are often linked together, and they are even more exacerbated among poor communities and among veterans, because we have to make certain that people who need help feel not stigmatized when they seek that help, but also can afford the help they need.
The best thing that we can do to treat mental illness and any other illness in this state is to make sure that folks have access to care. And the biggest issue standing in the way of most folks getting access to care is insurance and being able to pay the bill. So the first thing we have to do is expand Medicaid. Absolutely. It would also help strengthen our hospital system. We've had 8 hospitals close across the state since we made the terrible decision not to expand Medicaid and accept those federal dollars. And most of those hospitals that closed are in rural parts of the state. And folks are not only deprived of care, but job opportunities in communities have closed down. But we've got to go a step further. We've got to root out fraud, waste, and abuse in the system so that prices in healthcare go down for all of us. And we've got to end this practice in the state of employee misclassification, where workers are classified as independent contractors when really they're employees. And if they were employees, they would be able to have access to buy into health benefit plans. The bottom line is we've got to get more folks insured so that we can strengthen our healthcare network across the state and make sure that Georgia is a place where folks can be healthy so that they can continue to live, work, and play and enjoy job opportunities across the state.
This is a very challenging issue, and there's nobody up here that's got a silver bullet. I mean, the reality is there's nothing that you can not propose if you're willing to spend a lot more money. And the proposal on the table to expand Medicaid, I mean, we already have a $20 trillion debt at the federal level, and we're not balancing our budget. In other words, we're deficit spending every year at the federal level. So the notion that we can just go grab free money from the feds is it's not true. It's not a true thing. It doesn't exist for us to grab. And so the bottom line is we have to leverage ministries and nonprofits for many of these significant challenges that we face, because the government throws good money after bad without delivering results. We've had a mental health crisis for a lot longer than, just recently. The federal government used to obviously house those with mental illness for a long time, and then they said, well, that doesn't seem to be the right thing. Let's put them more into private homes and things of that sort. And then they mandated the states to do a lot of things. So I don't have a silver bullet solution, but what I will promise to you is that we have to tackle the issues. So we have to work with ministries, we have to work with nonprofits. We're going to have to work with the federal government to figure out a plan where they can help us. Because right now it's sort of like the federal government's sending out these mandates to us. We don't have the ability or the know-how to truly come to a solution for it, but they are clogging our jails, and when they get out of our jails, they're not getting the medical treatment that they need. But the reality is just a government-funded program is not going to ultimately solve the problem. We're going to have to roll our sleeves up as the next governor and bring together multiple groups of people to help us solve this challenge.
Thank you. Wow, time flies. We have time for one more question. It will deal with the death penalty. As you all know, here in Georgia, with the death penalty and developmental disabilities, Georgia has the highest standard in the nation, which is to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the offender has a developmental disability. In fact, I believe the language on the Georgia book is actually mental retardation. Some states, I believe like Florida, use a standard IQ, which I think is 70. Is it time for this state to look at or revamp that standard as it relates to the death penalties and those who are claiming to have a developmental disability? And Ms. Abrams, we'll start with you.
I fundamentally believe that the death penalty is wrong, and so my answer is that we should eliminate the death penalty. But with regards to changing the standard, we absolutely are out of compliance and out of lockstep with states that understand that developmental disabilities are not simply determined by an IQ test. It's also determined by your ability to comprehend the community and the consequences of your action. We have a cruel system that exploits those who do not have access. We have a cruel system that misappropriates the power of government, and I absolutely agree that we have to change that system, and I think the answer is to eliminate the death penalty.
Thank you.
I think that it's important that we issue a moratorium on the death penalty and study the disproportionate application of it to those with mental health, to those living in poverty, and based on race. I fundamentally believe that that is not justice the way that it is being implemented right now, and I support the moratorium until we can study and figure out a way to have fair implementation across the board.
I think capital punishment is broken in the way it's being carried out currently, but I'm for the practice. I think that some people have proven, based on the heinousness of their crimes, that from a standpoint of prevention long term, that we're sending the message this is not going to be tolerated in our society, and capital punishment is something that should do it. But it's not even being carried out. It's costing the state, billions of dollars with these multiple appeals and all the, the processes that are broken. So as it currently exists, capital punishment is broken. I think it needs to be brought back to bear and adjudicated more quickly when it's beyond a reasonable doubt, and it's passing, it's coming down from the verdict to the jury and the judge. So that's.
Well, I certainly support as well, but also trust our local prosecutors. Like all of us, at one point, we've been elected by our peers, and certainly I believe our prosecutors are using the tools that they have and with the means necessary to make right decisions when those type cases come up. So I certainly support that. But look, part of the 4-point plan that we have is regulatory reform. That's cutting government bureaucracy, streamlining government. Certainly the process for capital punishment needs streamlining. I mean, it's ridiculous how long it takes to get through the process. So whatever the reform is, it certainly needs to happen, and I think there's a lot of smart people in the state that could get together and figure out reasonable ways to do that that would be good for the whole process.
Thank you. Now the fun part. Y'all have questions? Ooh, look at that.
Go for it.
Do you support or oppose partisan gerrymandering? If you oppose it, what do you intend to do about it?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
Representative Evans is first.
Thank you for the question. Gerrymandering has had a terrible effect on politics in this state. Right now, in our state legislature, the vast majority of folks that are sitting under the Gold Dome get elected either in a Democratic primary or a Republican primary, and either face no general election opposition, or it's just not serious opposition for them. The way that we can change this practice is, in my opinion, to elect a Democratic governor, because right now the legislature is gerrymandered to be Republican. And so we set up a scenario going into the next redistricting session, which would be 2020, to have a Democratic governor and a Republican legislature, which forces the parties to work together and sit down at a table like adults and draw a map that is fair for this state. And if they don't, the Republican legislature can pass a partisan map and the Democratic governor can veto it, and then the courts get to draw a fair map. Or both sides can really act like adults and realize that neither side has complete power, and they should each put down the part of the hammer that they have and turn this over to an independent redistricting commission. And I think fundamentally the people of this state will win, because we will have a chance for folks to have more of an electoral incentive to worry about the general election, worry about what the majority of this state wants, and it will force us to focus on people and not partisan politics. And I look forward to that opportunity as your next governor.
Well, you know, I'm running against the notion of career politicians because I think they've let us down as a country, because they put themselves and their electoral success over the difficult challenges that we face as a society and dealing with them. So whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, I think putting all that power in the hands of folks is detrimental. We see the divisiveness in Congress. So I'm willing and open to the debate, and one of the reasons why I was a state senator for 5 years in the most competitive district in the state. And, you know, so in other words, the margins for victory were 53, 52, 51%. So we truly had a competitive general election in my district. And I think it creates more robust debate long term so that folks can actually solve the problems that we face. But here's the key challenge, is that this notion of an independent group is what's very difficult to achieve. Currently, if the political process decides it, then that's entirely political. But what about these people that you're going to choose to be independent? Nobody truly is. Everybody has a filter through which they view things. So I'm very open to the debate. In fact, I co-signed onto a bill, I believe, last term to have it be more independent. But it's, you know, you've got to make sure that it's truly going to be independent so that we can have robust dialogue in our nation's capital and in our state capitals across this country.
Well, I find it a little amusing that the Democrats are complaining about redistricting and partisan gerrymandering, when I remember when I won a state Senate seat, I literally ran because of the partisan gerrymandering that the Democrats were doing at the time when they were in control. And, you know, I had a good friend that I served with, Democrat Keith Hurd from Athens, and he always used to defend the map, saying it is a political process. It goes through a political process, and the party in power decides what the maps are. They normally have the votes to do it, but a lot of times you had different coalitions that would build, like conservative Republicans and African Americans, that would get maps approved. So I find that a little bit humorous, but I've got a record of getting in the Senate and voting for principles of redistricting that kept communities of interest intact where we could, that kept precincts whole where we could. And you could simply do the hold up the map test and tell the difference of the maps that we passed versus the one the Democrats had passed before we started that. So I think the notion of taking politics out of redistricting, I just don't see you being able to do that. Even if it's some independent group, there's always going to be politics when you're drawing political lines. They may not be partisan type things, they may be geographical and other things. So I don't know if that's realistic in today's world.
Thank you.
I believe that we have to think beyond the question of partisanship and also think about the impact that redistricting has had on communities of color. As Georgia becomes an increasingly diverse state, the gutting of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act has made those communities more vulnerable to partisan gerrymandering and simply to having their voices completely eliminated from the process. My first legislative session as leader was 2011. It was a redistricting special session that I went through as leader, where I watched where intentionally African Americans were packed into districts to dilute their capacity. Latinos were scattered across multiple districts to avoid their ability to actually start to claim and get the access they needed to having Spanish language ballots. And the Asian American community was essentially ignored. The result of that is that not only do we have partisan gerrymandering, we also have gerrymandering that does not respect communities of interest and makes more vulnerable those communities that need the most access. And so I support an independent redistricting commission that comes with the principles that were embedded in Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Because if we do not return to and restore the ability of this state to actually move forward where we have parity, opportunity, and a real voice for all of our people in our body politic, then we are going to be in a lot of trouble. State of Georgia is moving very quickly towards becoming one of the first majority-minority states in the South, in the Deep South. We'll be the very first in 2025. That is going to require that we have a gerrymandering, that we have a map drawing process that respects the diversity of our state and recognizes that everyone should have the ability to vote for someone who can represent their interest, whatever those interests are.
Thank you. Question? Over here in the orange, yeah.
Well, I would tell you that it doesn't matter to me what color someone is that commits a crime, but we've got to end gangs selling drugs, 14 and 15, 16-year-old children, whether they're white, black, or any other race, shooting up our streets and our neighborhoods. I'm not sitting there looking at numbers and what color someone is. That bullet and that blood is all the same. And I will be a governor that will protect our families and protect our neighborhoods and work with our law enforcement community to do that. But also will be a governor that will work very hard with anybody, including the federal government, to deport criminal illegal aliens that are costing us a lot of money and creating a lot of problems in our society. And that will actually free up resources for us to deal with other issues that we need to, like mental health and other things that we've talked about today. Well, thank you for that question. And since you mentioned education from the front, I'll try to answer what I think might be your question. But I've talked a lot about education in this campaign, about putting Georgians first, and I'm going to be a governor that's going to restore local control, try to take some of the mandates, the duties, the requirements off of many of our teachers and administrators. I certainly don't have a problem, and I don't think educators have a problem with being held accountable. But they simply have too much to do in the classroom now to be able to teach our children. So I think it's time that we restore some local control, continue to streamline, give opportunities to communities where we have failing schools and different choices, and trust our parents with those choices, and that is what I will do as governor.
Does anyone else want to answer that question, or can we take another question?
I would assume that's directed at me.
I guess so.
Okay. Well, I'll keep doing what we've done. We've got a strong track record in the Secretary of State's office of keeping our elections secure, accessible, and fair. We've certainly protected our agency from never being hacked before. I think the real question is what really did happen, because Russians meddling in the election and somebody hacking our system, they're about this far apart. And for fake news organizations like NBC and Meet the Press to keep talking about Russians hacking our system, this a story that's actually over 18 months old is completely incorrect. And Republican and Democrat secretaries of state are furious about that, because we all have taken extreme measures. We have and go at length to protect our systems. But let me just explain something that I don't believe the Homeland Security Department under Barack Obama even understood, but our voting system is not hooked to the internet. To break in or hack our system, you literally would have to break in a government building. You would have to break in the office where the elections equipment is, then you would have to break the sealed tape on the equipment, take out screws to be able to hack it. And you're talking about thousands of voting machines. So that is a completely different issue than someone getting in and getting access to a voter registration system, which is what happened in 2 states, but did not happen in Georgia because of the cybersecurity protections that we have taken. So we'll keep doing what we need to do. We're also currently working or just finished a pilot project on a new voting system that would change the way we are voting in Georgia. I think there's a lot of options to look at, but that's a very expensive endeavor. And the system that we piloted does have actually a paper ballot that you would vote that would be counted electronically, but you still have the paper ballot if you want to do literally a hand recount.
Yeah, Secretary or Senator?
Well, there is 2 things, and I just want to be clear. I think you're right. It's clear that the Russians meddled in the election, but using social media, trying to sway public opinion, but not in the sense that they were hacking and changing votes and that sort of thing. And so that's clearly going on. That's going to continue, and that's really a national social media issue and things of that sort. But the election security, which Secretary Kemp was referring to, I agree with. There's been no hacking of our machines because they're not connected, to the internet. So, as governor, I would make sure that we've got to do a couple things. Number one, we got to modernize our election machines and make sure that they present a paper ballot too, so that we can have so that actual recounts can be recounts. Because right now, it's just going to spit the exact same number out that it gave you the first time, and it's not really, in my opinion, a good enough way to verify what the vote was on the machine. But your issue of dealing with a national power trying to sway the electorate, that is going to be a national issue, and it's a national defense issue. So I would certainly cooperate as much as we could as governor with the federal government to make sure that but I will say all that they did was unfurl some truths and share them. So that was an interesting aspect of the election.
I think that it's very clear that there is evidence that our systems here in Georgia and across the country are vulnerable to hacking. And if we don't take that seriously, it's at our own peril. And trust in the integrity of our voting system is of the utmost importance. Voter participation is already lower than we'd like it to be. And when people fear that their vote is not even going to count or that it's not going to count as they cast it, we can't expect folks to continue to go out and vote in higher numbers. So the first thing that we have to do, and that I would do as governor, is to make sure that we're taking a top-down review of all of our computer systems within our state to make sure that we're not vulnerable and that we have the right protections in place. And as far as our voting machines as they exist now, I absolutely support and would make resources available to make sure that we have a paper trail available so that there is that fail-safe check so that we can make sure that our votes are being cast as we cast them. Obviously, this will cost money, but I think it's important. And I think that we could fund this, at least in part, by having automatic voter registration so that we can take the costs that we currently spend on processing voter registration applications.
I agree. I think that first and foremost, we have to understand that voter integrity is not simply about how we cast our vote. It's about who is allowed to vote. And I've fought very hard to ensure that everyone in the state of Georgia should have access to the right to vote. Voter suppression is as much a danger to our society as the hacking of our machines. And so I agree we have to deal with the voter integrity issue on the side of ensuring that our machines are not only not vulnerable to hacking, but should not be running on an operating system that's no longer in use. That's first. Second, it's making certain that we are restoring the rights of every person who's allowed to vote in the state of Georgia. And it's making certain that we not only adopt automatic voter registration, that we increase the ease with which people can cast their ballots. States like Washington and Oregon have implemented systems that allow for mail-in ballots. We need to have the fullest extent of access to the vote in the state of Georgia. And as the next governor, I will make that a priority.
Time for one more question, it looks like. Two more questions.
Secretary Kemp, you mentioned a revolving door into the criminal justice system, and I wanted to know from all of the panelists, you all mentioned, I think.
Well, that's a very good question, and I've certainly been a big supporter and remain a big supporter of many of the things that Governor Deal's done, but one of them is the accountability courts, the drug courts. The state court judge, Kent Lawrence from Athens, Clark County, really started, I believe, the first program in the state of Georgia, really was a leader in the country in the DUI courts and things of that nature. So we have set and done a lot of good work in Georgia, and I think we need to continue to fund those. I recently spoke at a graduation down in Henry County that was just very moving, uplifting, gave you faith in society and people's ability to get cleaned up, get sober, and re-enter. I also think we need to do more to continue to work with our inmates to get them job trained, to potentially look at how we could have them working while they're serving their sentence to try to help lower the cost and give them something to immediately do. And we need to continue, again, I hate to keep falling back to streamlined state government and regulatory reform, but we had a licensing issue the other day where an individual was trying to serve out their sentence, practicing in a field that requires a license, and them working actually put them in the wrong licensing status that created them having to lose their job because they were still in prison. So we've actually passed that along to try to get the Criminal Justice Reform Council and the legislators to try to fix that. So I think we need to look at those type things because, look, there are as many bad people as we have out there that we need to be tough on. We also have people that we do need to help and reform, and I'm a believer in that, and we'll certainly support that as governor.
As a member of the legislature, I co-sponsored the Criminal Justice Reform Council legislation, and I've been very involved. I've served on 4 of the subcommittees: parole and probation, juvenile justice reform, and then the overarching council for 2 cycles. What I will tell you is that we have 4 things we have to do. First is decriminalize poverty. The second is transition and reentry. And as I said, I have a very personal experience. That means dealing with housing issues. If you're an ex-offender and your last address was a state penitentiary, you cannot find a place to live. That means you cannot stabilize and you cannot meet the requirements often of your release. You have to be able to get a job. I'm very proud that Governor Deal agreed to an executive order to ban the box, but that needs to be state law and it needs to apply to both private and public employers. We also have to provide for stabilization for their health care because often these are ex-offenders who face mental or substance abuse challenges, or they have medical issues. They have to have access to health care. But we also have to understand that there have to be pathways for them to re-enter the job market. And I'm proud that I was able to work with Governor Deal to get legislation passed that allows them to apply for those professional licenses, because unfortunately in the state of Georgia we've expanded the number of professional licenses you have to have an occupation in our state. Number 3, we have to change how we deal with juvenile justice. We have to actually expand the jurisdiction of our juvenile justice courts to 18 and continue to invest in the juvenile justice prevention grants to make certain that we are not putting our young people in prison and putting them on a pathway to going to our larger prisons, our adult prisons. And lastly, we have to improve community safety through increased community policing, but also increasing the relationship between our people, our communities, and the police, because one of the best ways to keep people out of jail is to make certain that police aren't arresting people for the wrong thing simply because they don't like the way they look or where they live.
As someone who has personally lived the life-changing effect of higher education, I think making sure that those that are behind bars have access to education and job training skills is one of the best things that we can do. The vast majority of those in jail right now did not graduate from high school. I believe it's 70%, but Greg, if you'll not PolitiFact me on that, because I'm not exactly sure, but I know it's a very high number. And the point is, we have got to address the root cause of why a lot of folks are ending up in jail in the first place, and it's out of desperation and an inability to provide for themselves that leads good people to do bad things. And so I think making GED classes a reality across the board in our jail system and making sure that the technical colleges and our prison systems partner so that folks can have access to a 9-month certificate, an 18-month certificate, in some instances 2-year certificates, so that when they are out of jail, they will be able to go into a job that will allow them to provide for themselves and their families. And we've got to make sure that we ban the box so that they're going to be able to apply for those jobs and have a fair chance at them. One piece of legislation that I was proud to support a couple of years ago that didn't make it all the way across was a tax credit for employers who would hire folks who were coming out of the criminal justice system. I think that kind of legislation is a step in the right direction to make sure that we're giving folks opportunities to truly rehabilitate and be productive members of society.
And we have time for one final.
Senator Hill.
Oh, my apologies.
Some of the things that were said are great ideas. I do think that it's very important that we look at the track record of success of the government sort of elevating people to the next level, and we're not good at it. We don't have a great track record there, but ministries and nonprofits do. So partnering with them, giving them access. One of the things we can do while they're under our custody and locked up is giving them meaningful job training and things that are relevant. We used to have manual labor be a part of the prison process, which is a skill that is hard work is a soft skill that's developed over time. But additionally, the technical skills that can be meaningful that they can have access to. So while they're under our custody, certainly giving them meaningful job skills that they can take out into the marketplace. But otherwise, there's so many great ideas in the free market out there in terms of nonprofits that are gifted at delivering results and life change and moving people from broken to repaired and good to great.
Beliefs, or those are some beliefs of a minority of people in the state. You will send us into the throes of North Carolina, and I really want y'all to think about that. Where is this desire to take away all the good work that Governor Deal, a Republican, has done to bring business to the state by supporting these bills in these states? So,
Our nation, you mentioned that there's a minority of people that have some of these beliefs, but think about the minorities we have in this room. I mean, we're a nation built upon protecting minorities in their belief system and not using the secular big hand of government of bashing people into submission that they can't exercise their religion. So this is very important, what we're talking about. Yeah.
People came to America without rights because we were true. America was
Right.
given to us because of the First Amendment. We're not talking about that kind of thing. These are the state needs this business base to have the work.
And all I'm saying, not to.
I'm just saying, when you talk about all these things, know that everyone outside the state is listening, and these things look at North Carolina, that's all.
And let's have an honest debate about this, because I will tell you what is bad for our business climate is the debate about religious liberty legislation, not the statute itself. It's on the books at the federal level and in 27 other states, and not once has the statute been used to bludgeon somebody into existence.
North Carolina, you might want to talk.
That's a different bill. That is about transgenderism. That has nothing to do with RFRA.
Okay. Is there a question for any other candidate? I just want to make sure we end with every candidate getting a question. Gentleman here in the blue jacket.
I could slip out of Atlanta. What would you do if such a bill landed on your desk?
We can start here with Ms. Abrams.
I would veto the bill, but I think it's also about setting up a process. And right now, there is no real process for creating new cities in the state of Georgia. What happens is that either it's done through local legislation or it goes through what seems to be a process through the Governmental Affairs Committee in the House typically. The challenge with that is that it is so hyper-partisan that there rarely is actually an opportunity for debate and for understanding. As a former deputy city attorney for the city of Atlanta, I can tell you that often the information being used uses a trajectory of economic capacity that stops at about the 7-year mark. Well, typically the time that cities become expensive is around years 9 and 10. That's when people want more money for the jobs they're doing, is when things start to cost more money because you've got to start replacing infrastructure and equipment, and it is a very, very long process that we do not do a deep enough dive on. I have opposed the creation of cities throughout the state of Georgia that have not had adequate amounts of information, in part because often it's driven by either classism or racism. Those are not viable reasons to create new cities. Georgia's structure is designed for counties with some municipalization, and if we are going to move towards hyper-municipalization in the state of Georgia, we have to relook at how we actually fund the responsibilities of cities and counties. We have seen counties decimated in their economies because of the creation of cities that are brought about by animus and not by an intent of patriotism or developing better ideas. And so I am a very strong proponent of creating a more important system. This is a dense state, and we're going to become even more dense. We're at 10.5 million people now. More people are coming, and we are going to have to create probably more local governments. But we have to have a true, thoughtful, and independent process that actually looks at the holistic needs and is not simply a reaction to not wanting to be next to someone you don't want to call your neighbor.
I just had a realization that we've all been really bad at repeating the question. So folks that are home may be very confused about some of the things we've been talking about. But this question was one about the city of Eagles Landing separating out of what is currently the city of Stockbridge. And if a bill like that were to come to my desk as governor, I would veto it. And I do think that we need to set up an independent process, somewhat within the legislature, but certainly as separated as possible as we can get from the politics, because this is a very serious issue. More government, I think the folks on this side of the table would normally say that's a bad thing. And it seems like it depends on where you're sitting on whether that's true for you in the legislature and you're talking about the creation of a city or the creation of new counties or the division thereof. And I just think that we've got to slow down a little bit and study this process and make sure that we're being fair and consistent across the board and that we're doing what's best for Georgians and not playing politics with our city governments.
Yeah, when I first got in the legislature and there was all this talk of creating cities, it was confusing why people would want to put another layer of government on themselves. But then you start to dig into the issue and you find that the municipality or the county that they are paying taxes to, they didn't feel served, by the services, and they're going to have to pay taxes to somebody, so they would prefer to do it to a more responsive entity that was delivering results. But this is a unique and odd situation where there was already a city, and so, to be honest with you, I'd have to look at it further. I'm not really haven't been paying attention closely to the issue. I'd like to read about it and understand it. But on its face, it doesn't sound like the right precedent to allow folks to come out. I like the notion of them, having means available to reject annexation to begin with. But once you're in, that creates an interesting precedent.
Well, I would just say to myself, it would depend on what, whether I would sign a bill in the future. I'd want to know what's in it. I prided myself when I was in the legislature of actually doing that. Sometimes that doesn't happen. But, that the battle, from what I understand, is political. I think you're always going to have that case. I'm sure, if the Democrats ever got in control again, you're going to be dealing with the same issue, just in reverse. So. But I do think it's worthy of looking at processes for something like that. But quite honestly, when things like that pass through the legislature, a lot of times they're not followed anyway. There was a bill called GORC, called the Georgia Occupational Regulatory Review Council, that was supposed to review professional licensing and any new licenses, and that hasn't been followed either. So it's just why we need someone in government that will make sure we fundamentally reform how it spends, operates, and taxes.
Great. Thank you all. We're at time. Please applaud our panelists. Thank you to our moderators. We've invited our candidates, their staff, and all of you to reception that's taking place at the end of the hallway, the door to my right in the back of the room. So please hang around and relax, and hopefully some of our candidates will stay with us so that we can continue the discussion. Thank you.